Hey, what's going on, guys? In this video, we're going to go over our NFL Week 2 DFS picks. I'm joined by Joe Holka once again, so we'll start off with his picks, then we'll get into a couple of my own picks. Let's get right into it.
Thanks, Kev. Hopefully, some of you followed our picks from last week. Had a bunch of people actually reach out in the comments about the Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews stack, so that was awesome. And if you guys are looking for any more DFS or betting content throughout the week, definitely check out my channel as well. Kev's going to throw a link in the description. Had a really nice score myself in week 1. I do actually do a review of that $1,500 entry tournament on DraftKings every week. That high stakes video goes up on Tuesdays, so check that out. But before we get into my top 5 GPP picks for week 2, I do want to remind you guys that I'm live every Sunday morning on Twitch before kickoff, 11:30 Eastern time, to take a little bit of Q&A. So if you want to come hang out with us, twitch.tv/Joe Holka. My first GPP pick for week 2 is going to be at the running back position, and historically this is not a position where we have to go super low owned, so Alvin Kamara is going to be someone that I'll be playing in cash games and tournaments all over the board in week 2. They get this Rams defense that Christian McCaffrey gets shredded for 11 targets, 10 catches, 81 yards, and that's only through the air. So I love Kamara in this same matchup, and I do think that he has probably the best floor ceiling combo in the entire week out of any player. So I'm going to be all over Kamara. I also think that it could lead you to a different roster construction than everyone that's just going to play Josh Jacobs at 4,700. I think Josh Jacobs is interesting, but I'm not so much on him for GPPs. I like getting a little bit different. I do think if we pay all the way up for Kamara and then do a little bit different types of things at wide receiver, that's the route I'm going to go with most of my teams. So if we do want to get a little bit different at running back, I think a really good leverage spot this week is actually Leonard Fournette at 6,300. He was certainly a disappointment last week, but now that he's going to be playing with 6th-round pick Gardner Minshew as his quarterback, I don't think that anyone's going to play this guy, and we can still give a reasonable expectation as far as him touching the ball a ton. He had an 86% snap count in week 1, did have 6 targets in the passing game as well, and I think that's really going to remain steady, especially if he can stay above that 80% snap rate. So Houston, on the other side of this matchup, actually allowed 9 receptions to opponents out of the backfield. So this is the big game I think that everyone was expecting in week 1, with a lot of people just kind of moving off of this guy. And I think that's almost always a mistake with a bell cow back. His price is in a spot where I think that if you really want to kind of pivot to someone that'll be lower owned, that's still going to see volume at the running back position, Leonard Fournette in week 2. My third GPP pick for you guys today has a little bit to do with one thing that I think is super important in DFS, especially in the beginning of the season. I think a lot of people really get kind of tied into a big week 1 performance, right? So I would imagine that a lot of people are going to go back to Sammy Watkins in Kansas City. I'm not as interested in Sammy Watkins, especially with his price that has been elevated significantly. They got super aggressive with him. He's all the way up to 7,200. I'm actually interested in going back to Travis Kelce at tight end. So a lot of people played him last week, paying all the way up for him. But if you guys remember back in week 1 last year, he actually had 6 targets, only 1 catch in week 1. Followed that up the next week, 10 targets, 7 receptions, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Just absolutely smashed at a way lower ownership than he was in week 1 last year. I could see that happening again this year. My 4th GPP pick for you guys on week 2 is going to be Keenan Allen. He's 7,600 at the Lions, and Detroit is a team that just got absolutely shredded by Larry Fitzgerald, who plays exclusively in the slot. And a lot of people are going to be all over Austin Eckler this week. I think Keenan Allen could actually go under owned relative to his expectation, and he's already got a massive target share in this offense. Hunter Henry is now on the shelf, and the only other competition for targets for Keenan Allen at this point is Travis Benjamin, Dontrell Inman. So second most targets inside the 20-yard line in week 1. So I'm interested in him for sure. I don't love him as much with Phillip Rivers, but if you're looking kind of for a one-off of this game, I'm super interested in Keenan Allen, especially if he ends up being not super popular at that price point. Final GPP pick for you guys. We had such good luck with stacks last week. I'm going to give you guys another contrarian stack. So this Arizona Cardinals and Baltimore Ravens game is probably going to be the highest paced game of the entire week. So I'm actually going to go to the other side. A lot of people are just going to fire with Lamar Jackson. I think he's a great play. Definitely cash viable. In tournaments, a lot of times I want to go to the other side of the game. So Kyler Murray, 5,400. I'm actually going to fully game stack this with David Johnson at 7,100. Again, another guy that somewhat underperformed in week 1, but is still going to see volume. And Christian Kirk, we just talked about Larry Fitzgerald, but Christian Kirk was actually seeing some more valuable targets, which I'll get into in a minute. And then I'm going to bring it back on the other side of the Baltimore game with Mark Andrews. We talked about Mark Andrews last week. I think we can go back to him at 3,800. His price hasn't really moved. So just to talk a little bit more about this stack, Murray is someone that went 20 of 29 for 239 yards in the final quarter and overtime in week 1. So I definitely think that this is an offense we're going to want to have shares to. The Cardinals actually ran passing plays on 60% of their snaps, and Baltimore is actually entering this game without their top corner, Jimmy Smith. So either Larry Fitzgerald or Christian Kirk is going to be seeing a third string DB. So I definitely think that Kirk is going to be the lower owned of the two in GPPs. We talked about recency bias and how everyone's going to kind of be on Fitzgerald, but Kirk saw 12 targets, also converted that 2-point conversion as well in week 1. And if we're just going to talk about David Johnson, no one wants to play this guy, but he nearly had 2 touchdowns in week 1. He had 137 total yards on 87% of the snaps. I love that. I definitely think that I prefer Murray to Lamar Jackson in tournaments, but this is still a great spot for Andrews. He saw 8 of the 26 passes that Baltimore threw in week 1. And Arizona, let's not forget, they just gave up 6 catches and 131 yards to the rookie TJ Hawkinson. So I think Andrews is a prime target that we can target for follow through in week 2. And I'll give you guys a stack at the end every week. So let's see if we can go 2 for 2. That's it for me, guys. Going to kick this one back to Kev. Just want to remind you guys to check out my YouTube channel as well. Have a ton of DFS content over there. And come hang out with us on Twitch on Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, twitch.tv/Joe Holka. Kev, what do you got for us?
Thanks for those picks, Joe. Let's move on to my 2 DFS picks. I'm looking for a bounce back week. Last week had a bit of a struggle there with my 2 GPP picks. Again, these are maybe riskier plays that I'm going to be throwing out, but they're guys who I think make some good GPP plays and might come in at a bit lower ownership. So I do think James Conner, my first pick here on the left, will be somewhat owned, but there's so many running back choices out there. I don't think he'll be as highly owned as you would kind of expect at that price, or at least I would expect. 6,800, I think he makes a great play this week. The Steelers are at home versus the Seahawks as 3.5-point favorites. And after their week 1 showing against the Patriots, I think some people will be off the Steelers offense in general. I do think Juju and Connor will have some ownership, but I don't think it's as high as it would be if they had a better game in week 1. So James Conner, despite just 10 carries in week 1, he's going to carry the load for Pittsburgh in the backfield. He's going to be that bell cow type running back that we're looking for. And at that price, 6,800 at home, he's someone I'm definitely going to target. If we look back to last year, anytime the Steelers were at home and favored by 3.5 or more points, he averaged 24 DraftKings points. So that's kind of, it's not the best stat because in some of those games he might have been favored by like 7 points or 10 points or whatever, but it just shows you when they're favored, expected to win, and at home he does usually have pretty big games. So I expect a big game out of James Conner, and I'm definitely going to be playing him at 6,800. My second week 2 DFS pick is going to be wide receiver Will Fuller at $5,300 on DraftKings. Again, I'd play both of these guys on FanDuel as well. But I personally play on DraftKings, so that's why I've got the DraftKings pricing up there. The Texans are at home versus the Jags as 9-point favorites. And I do think Will Fuller's ownership is going to be suppressed a little bit because he saw just 3 targets in week 1. But he was on the field for 97% of the offensive snaps, and he had a nice 69 yards on those 3 targets. So we know that Will Fuller can have some big games, especially at home as favorites. If we look back to his last 8 home games, favored by 3 or more points, he's had 24 or more DraftKings points in 4 of those 8 games. So that's kind of a mouthful, but basically when the Texans are at home and they're favored by a decent amount, Will Fuller has the potential to completely go off. So I think this is one of those times to kind of take the gamble on Fuller at 5,300. I think it's a pretty good price. They're facing the Jags, who have had a good defense in the past. I think they still will have a pretty good defense this year. But the Texans' offense is pretty lethal, and I think they're kind of going to go to work here in week 2 and have a big game. So I like Fuller. It's a little bit of a riskier play. I wouldn't play him in cash, but at 5,300, I think he makes a good GPP play. So that's going to wrap up my 2 picks for this week, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks again to Joe for joining us. If you enjoy these videos and you enjoy me bringing on Joe, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And good luck this week. Hopefully one of you guys wins that $1 million. Talk to you later.